Open source from one to at scale. So originally, when I thought about doing this talk, I thought the thing that people wanted to hear about most was a niche WebRTC topic from implementing Pion. You hear about like, here's the battles of implementing DTLS. But really, what people are most interested in was my experience with RTC and open source and what I learned along the way and the benefits of it, and like, why do I keep doing it? Why am I not just worried about working on a proprietary product full time? So for me, I break down the reasons I do open source into two categories, or these are the things that I've realized or why I continue to do open source. Is first off, for me, I just build better. I feel that the things I do are higher quality. I enjoy it more, and that's why I continue to do it. And the first thing is that I spend a lot less time debugging issues. Where when I'm at a company and I'm debugging an issue that's particular to the company, it's frustrating. You do it alone. You ask for help, but sometimes everyone else is busy. But the thing with open source is you're not alone anymore. You're not, and we'll talk more about this. The other great thing about open source is I don't question what people want anymore. There's direct communication. I can figure out what you care about. And then the last thing is when I'm building, now it's much easier to find people to help me to build because I have a resource that I can pull directly from. And the other part that keeps me involved is that I feel like I just live better as a developer. There were always things when I was at a job that I wanted to try, but I couldn't find time to, but now I can. My career became something entirely different when I started working on open source. I had more opportunities and I had more people and more companies I worked with. And the last is I find myself not as frustrated with the software I use anymore. So before I go into talk all this, I want to give my background so you can understand where I'm coming from. A lot of these things that I care about are heavily biased because they were solutions to problems that I had. So my background is that I created on Pion, which is a collection of Go software that's worked for RTC. The most popular one is the WebRTC implementation. You see it. A lot of companies use it. It's used as a component for a lot of open source projects. And then after I wrote Pion, when I was on paternity leave, I wrote WebRTC for the Curious. It was a book about how WebRTC actually works. And now that was all done, recently I've been involved on adding WebRTC to OBS. So instead of broadcasting via RTMP, now you can broadcast via WebRTC. And then full-time I work as the field CTO at LiveKit. And beyond that, before that, I had experience in a lot of different places with WebRTC. And that's the reason I'm so excited about this field, is that it lets me do so many different things. I've got to see people do robotics. I've got to see people do broadcasting. And now I'm seeing people do AI with it. Like not all of these things I wasn't an expert in, but I get to be on the periphery and help people with their WebRTC problems. And that's why I continue to be excited and invigorated about this field. So thank you to everyone. First off, as I give this talk, I'm going to talk about a lot of different open source projects, and it's going to sound like, oh, Sean is the person that built all this by himself. But the truth is that there were so many people that helped me, and I want to thank everyone. This list is everyone that's been involved with WebRTC for the Curious and Pion. Thank you so much for contributing and working with me. These projects wouldn't be what they are today without your help. So I'm lucky. I get to come up here and talk about it and be excited, but only because of everything that people did here. So first off, I want to talk as a company, why should you be excited about WebRTC, or why is it something that would be beneficial to you? So the first lesson for me, one of the things that really convinced me that WebRTC was worth my time at a company, was working on Kinesis video streams, which is a product at AWS. And we did a pure C implementation of WebRTC because we had all of these products that wanted to do real-time video. You had security robots and delivery and, just all these things that were outside that usual space that I was used to of conferencing and broadcast. But the issue was they couldn't use any WebRTC implementations that existed at the time. The requirement was that they needed a WebRTC implementation that was in pure C because they were using proprietary tool chains, and it had to be very, very small, under 256 kilobytes. And at that time, this AWS was already very familiar with GitHub. And so by default, we were putting stuff up on GitHub. We wanted to be developer friendly. I understood this. I wanted to use CMake and GitHub. But one of the things that happened that I was so excited about is for the first time I got to talk directly with customers. There was no more guessing about like, what did they actually want? What should we build? What should we be doing? But now these developers would get on GitHub and they would file issues directly and be like, I'm trying to build this and it doesn't work because of this reason. And we would talk back and forth, and maybe sometimes they'd even open PRs, which is amazing that you would build something and then someone would come and correct your mistake. And at the same time, they're still paying for the product. It's just a better experience for everyone. That developer isn't blocked on you. The developer outside the company isn't blocked on you anymore. And so here's a screenshot of one scenario I had where Uber was using KVS. Alex reported the issue and he ended up fixing himself. It's such a great experience as a company to not have to block others and just have them see them be effective without you. The next time that I was working on open source that I really started to understand it and fall in love with it was when I was using GStreamer as a library. So my involvement with GStreamer was pretty minor. Like I added AV1 support and small bug fixes to RTMP source and other things like that. But I had run into this very deep seg fault in the video compositor, completely out of my realm. Like I was debugging all of this, tens of thousands of lines of C code. I was completely lost. And so what I did when I got started is I just posted a GST launch of the issue. And surprisingly, another developer contributed the fix. This is something that I would estimate would take me like 4 to 6 weeks. Not something I could fix on my own very easily. And after that 4 to 6 weeks, I probably would have come up with a worse fix. But for me, it was so relieving to not have to deal with this issue and on top of that, all these other people that were running the issue as well, it was fixed for them. So when I see companies that they believe that if they work in a silo, they want to keep all of their information proprietary to their company. They want to just work on internal bug trackers and not have to worry about talking with other people. You're not actually saving yourself time. Having outside people get involved and maybe I see a lot of people, they believe that open source will slow them down, but I don't believe that's true. That you're actually slowing yourself down, working in this silo and just talking among yourselves. That if you have these outside eyes and help, you'll actually move much quicker. And the next is I see, and it's kind of a similar problem, but the same core issue is that people believe that working in that silo. So I worked on Amazon Silk, which is a Chromium fork just for the Silk browser and other devices by Amazon. And we had hundreds of patches that were just specific to these devices. And some were adding Amazon features, so they couldn't be open source, but a lot of it, I believe, would have been useful to send upstream. But it was such a hard process to do that it ended up just being easier to keep things internal. But the issue was we had to employ a team of 6 people that would constantly what we call up-leveling, which is just rebasing the master branch of Chromium to make sure that we were never more than 14 days behind because of security issues and the browser space is moving so rapidly. But when we would rebase, all of a sudden, a patch wouldn't apply anymore. So we would have to go and figure out like what was the original purpose of this patch. Many times the original author was gone, so you couldn't even ask them what the purpose was anymore. So we'd wonder, can we delete it? And if we couldn't, like maybe we wouldn't even be able to modify Chromium anymore to do this. So my belief is like these patches were a liability. They weren't even helping us. That in the short term, it was great to get that feature out the door, but in the long term, it slowed us down. Like what else could we have accomplished in the time that we spent working on these patches? Like it might feel that it's benefiting you, that you're using an open source project and you have all these patches internally. Like maybe it feels like a competitive advantage, or it feels like it would be a waste of time to upstream them, but it's just not the case. You're wasting so much time in the short term that the benefits I think, speak for themselves. And then next, as a developer, open source has all these benefits. So for me, I started my career in tech. Growing up in Ohio, I had no connection to the tech scene. I didn't understand open source. I didn't understand any of these things. And I loved computers. I loved fiddling with things. I would build, Doom wads. Like this was my background. But I just couldn't find my start. I would go and buy books at Barnes and Nobles to try to figure out languages and always ended up as a dead end. But for me, I took a job. I was working in IT. I was installing computers and pulling wires and stuff like that. And they used free PBX. And so I was able to build little small features like making some UI changes or making some small behavior changes to free PBX. And thanks to this, like I have my career today. Once I got some knowledge with free PBX, I was able to get a referral into another company, and then I worked full time as a free PBX developer. And only because of open source do I do any of this work I do today. And now this is what I use to hire other people. So in all these open source projects, I watch out for people that are motivated and excited, and I try to bring them in. As a hiring manager, if your projects were open source, you would have all of these new people that you would be introduced to that you'd be able to hire and work on projects. The next problem is it's just slower to work alone. The first time I saw this was working on the PHP project. So I've been working on open source for a few years. I hadn't done much. I'd worked a lot on like company projects, but I hadn't done much outside of that. And so as my first stab, I got involved with PHP, and there was an RFC that I saw that I thought was interesting. And I asked, could I help? And the original author had said, sure, and added me. And I was amazed at how welcome I was, and I was able to bring new ideas, and I learned along the way, and we were able to split the work. And I've kind of brought this into my other projects as well, that the more people you bring from the outside, the more diverse opinions you get about how the software should work. And you would think that that would be frustrating. You would think that, okay, you want to just have a singular vision about your open source project and you don't care what other people have to say. Like, you know how you want to build it. But when you bring other people in, like, the work goes faster, and these ideas that they bring to the project make it so much better. And as a developer, the other thing that's really important is to realize that you don't even understand the reward yet that working on these open source projects will bring you. So when I started working on Pion, I had no idea where it would take me. I thought it would just be another thing that I work on. I would have fun. I would learn. I would build a couple of things, and maybe I'd be able to use it like, my biggest goal is to be able to use it at a job. And beyond that, I had no higher aspirations. But it has given me so much more. The only reason I'm here today is because I started working on that. I was able to travel. I went to London and went to ComCon, and I met all these other people that were passionate about WebRTC and open source, and it just fills me with so much joy and energy. These are finally to find people that care about the same things as me. And my work is more interesting. What I alluded to earlier with working on robotics and working with AI, all these things that I would never be able to see, but because I worked on Pion, that I got to see all these things. And for me, I say yes to every opportunity. That yes, you might not make money directly with open source, but don't let that scare you away. That's not the experiences, and the other things you get will be worth way more than the money you would directly earn. And the last part is about what, as a user of open source, what benefits does that bring you? So one project that I worked on is OBS that I talked about earlier. And for me, like, I really thought that WebRTC would bring a bunch of benefits to the broadcasting space, to be able to talk to people interactively. Right now when you do RTMP, your audience will type something and then you'll respond to it 3 to 5 seconds later. But with WebRTC, if someone sends a message and I can respond in 200 milliseconds, it's just an entirely different experience. The other one I'm really excited about is this better screen sharing or camera quality. A lot of people will be like, I'm not happy with WebRTC because of the picture quality. But with OBS, I can pick the encoders I use, I can lay out my screen exactly how I want it, and I can broadcast. Like, I think this is the next step in making sure that people have the best experience possible when making content on the internet. And there's other really interesting things like adverse networks. Instead of like blocking and waiting until the network is better, we can do forward error correction or other interesting things. I don't know where this is going to go, but it does feel compelling. But as a user of open source, OBS, I feel very empowered by it. The fact that I can make these changes myself, the fact that I can distribute patches and other people can apply them and use them. Like, it doesn't matter what the owners of the project feel, but as an open source project, I can do whatever I want with it. And this applies to all open source projects, that you can make it into what you want it to be. The other open source project that I learned a lot from was WebRTC for the Curious. So WebRTC for the Curious is an open source book on how WebRTC actually works. The protocols, not just here's a tutorial on how to use Pion. And I did it when I was on paternity leave. I wanted to write down what I learned about WebRTC for the protocol. And along the way, I met so many developers that were doing interesting things. So this was before KBS. So this was my first foray into like talking to people that were doing embedded and talking to people that were doing robotics and talking to people that were doing drones with WebRTC. And I was like, this is wild. I didn't realize that all the interesting things that people could build. And I started to get an appreciation that like one piece of software isn't the answer to all the problems. Not everyone is, some people are doing servers, some people are doing little small embedded things. There's too many constraints. You can't just have one piece of software for everything. So that's my journey as like an individual in open source, all the things I learned and saw and worked on. And now I'm doing something a little bit differently. And I say open source at scale, but it's open source as a full-time job. So right now I'm working at LiveKit, and LiveKit is a pure Go implementation of WebRTC server, and it comes with that batteries added. So you have like SDKs and protocol bridging and all these things that people are building from scratch. And that open source version is also hostable. So you can take that and you can put it and you can pay us and we'll run it for you. And it's been a joy to watch how LiveKit thrived from open source. So for years, I've been watching it from the outside. And this is the things I've been seeing are the things for me that I felt good about joining. So LiveKit encourages the autonomy of people. If you have a bug or you have something you want to understand how it really works, I can just go to GitHub, I can pull down the code for the LiveKit SFU, and I can look how it really works. There's no more just like filing a support ticket and like hoping for the best. I can modify the code and I can support myself. And I love the independence. There's no like vendor lock in here where if you're using like what happened with Twilio, where if someone shuts down the WebRTC offering, like you might have a year to switch somewhere else and like you would build into their proprietary APIs. I like that the users aren't locked in. They can do what's best for themselves. And I love the communication. The fact that I can just be on Slack and people can email me directly and I don't have to be cryptic about what I'm working on. I'm making PRs on GitHub. If you want to know what I'm working on, you can just go look at my GitHub profile at LiveKit. You don't have to guess what the next things we're going to work on. But one thing I was concerned was about this mix of open source and money. I read about all these companies that are relicensing, and I was like, am I going to kind of fall into the same trap on a personal level now that WebRTC isn't a hobby anymore? There's going to be this conflict of interest. Well, the pressures of work impact the quality. Now that we have to ship something for Q1 so we can do this, will this change? With Pion, I was always able to work at the pace that worked best for me. But at the end, like I was willing to take that because it's a dream of many to have to work on your passion, which is what Pion is for me. So far I feel good about it. Someone told me like as long as you align your incentives with your customers, that things will turn out good. So that's what I'm trying to do. Figure out like if I make it so that things are open source and customers are successful, that if those things align, then I'm doing what's right. And I think in ways, the one I'm really excited about is how LiveKit bills for bandwidth instead of time. So instead of billing N cents an hour, we bill for N cents gigabyte. And that's one of those things where the incentives line up. Because I see it's pushing all these users to use VP9 instead of H.264. So yeah, I'll continue to look for small wins like that, where I can do things in a way that, yes, there's financial transactions, but in the way that they're working, it's pushing for what the users are best. And it's not binary. It's with code, you can write a linter, you can write a pre-commit hook to make sure that things work. But with every customer conversation, you have to make sure that you're pushing what's best for people. And it's kind of all this with open source and people making money. People are trying to relicense projects. People are trying to release they have a product where they have an open source version that isn't as featureful. They have a proprietary version that's more featureful. I don't know what the answer is, but it's just something you have to think about in every decision and every conversation. And so that's it. I think for me, this is the multitude of like why open source is better. For users, it respects you. It lets you do what's best for you. If the code is open, I can go make the changes. I can build. I understand what I want best. And so I can go and make those changes. As a developer, you represent yourself with open source. Like there's no more just saying, I worked at this company, and so this is why you should hire me. Like your resume can just have a link to your GitHub and people can see exactly what you work on. And for companies, it's great. It's just a better product that you end up with. And you can hire people better and you spend less time on things that aren't important, like having a bunch of patches and changes that really aren't that beneficial. And it's really easy to get started with open source. It's not like you have to open source your entire code base. You can just, the next project you work on, consider like, does this have to be an internal utility or could this just be an open source thing? Because think of how good it would be for the developers working at your company if they can work on something and they can be more motivated and excited and people can see what they're working on and it's beneficial for them. Start doing a little bit and see where it gets you. If you want a community to talk about, like, please reach out. Here's all the ways you can reach me. My favorite place to talk is in the Pion Slack. It's you don't when you join, you don't have to talk about Pion. Anything video RTC is totally on topic. So join and we'd love to talk. And then if you want to talk directly, you feel free to just add me on LinkedIn and let's talk directly. Send me an email. If you have any questions about open source or WebRTC, I'm always here. Thank you so much.